Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, whenever you're watching this. I'm pleased to join you on the first of what we hope will be a series of virtual events from Unbounce in 2021. I'm Colin Loughran. I lead the content marketing team here at Unbounce, and I'm really pumped to host today's discussion of how COVID-19 and the pandemic may have impacted your industry's conversion rates in 2020. Before I share the agenda, I wanted to quickly make a territorial acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that Unbounce is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We're grateful to be here on lands cared for by Indigenous peoples past and present. So let's move into our agenda. So I am currently welcoming you to the virtual event. That is sort of stage one. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our expert panelists. I'm really excited to get them out here. Then we'll take about 10 minutes or so to introduce the conversion benchmark report. I want to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of context. This is a resource designed to help marketers in businesses of all sizes to build and optimize landing pages for more conversions. It is also the inspiration for today's virtual event, in that a lot of the data that we'll be talking about comes from this report. Once we've got that whole context, the panelists and I will do a deeper dive into some of the more prominent findings about how COVID-19 may have impacted businesses in 2020. And then finally, we'll leave a little bit of time toward the end for any questions you may have for our panelists about the pandemic and your marketing strategy for 2021. So again, you can use that questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen there to ask questions as they occur to you as the panelists are speaking, and we will dig through those and answer as many as we can towards the end of today's talk. If you have questions about the conversion benchmark report or any of the data points itself, two of its authors are here today as well. So Garrett Hughes, a content creator here at Unbounce, and Floss Taylor, a data analyst, are both here to clarify anything. Garrett's great, but I'm actually particularly excited to have Floss here because sometimes we get those data questions that us as content marketers do not necessarily feel fully equipped to answer. So if you've got a complex question, she's got complex answers. Am I overpromising, Floss? I hope I'm not overpromising. We'll do our best to respond to any of those kinds of questions in the chat itself. So I recommend using that chat feature to interact with them, as well as interacting with one another, and saving that QA for our panelists. So speaking of, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Ayat, I'm going to start with you. Best-selling author, successful entrepreneur, authority on marketing optimization, Ayat Shukairy is a recognized expert on marketing strategy and an in-demand speaker who is presented at marketing conferences throughout the world. With over 13 years of entrepreneurial and marketing experience, Ayat helps companies create websites that visitors fall in love with while increasing their online sales. Her clients include eBay, 3M, the Special Olympics, Dish Network, Discovery, and many more. That's quite the list already. Ayat is also the co-author of Conversion Optimization, an Amazon.com best-selling book, and I think a real classic of the genre. In her book, she combines groundbreaking marketing research with powerful storytelling and case studies to demonstrate how to leverage these principles to create killer websites. Ayat provides one of the most comprehensive lists of strategies and actionable insights for helping websites capture more of their visitors into lifetime customers. She provides insights grounded in comprehensive research, the best contemporary psychology and behavioral science, which any company can start implementing immediately. Welcome, Ayat.
Thank you, Colin. Excited to be here.
And I'm excited to have you. Our other speaker, Luke Carthy. Let me introduce Luke. Having kicked off his e-commerce journey at 16, wow, selling on eBay, Luke Carthy went on to earn his stripes, securing various in-house SEO and product owner roles at a number of B2B and B2C e-commerce brands. Today, Luke is a well-seasoned e-commerce consultant and international speaker who parks his butt right in the center of strategy, CRO, and SEO disciplines. Having worked with some awesome brands, including Cat, Renault, and Mayflex, Luke knows a thing or two when it comes to getting C-suite buy-in and delivering smart, scalable e-commerce growth. Luke, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Colin. These intros are awesome, man. I should pay you for some voiceover stuff or something.
I got to say, I'm really impressed by the 16 that you started your e-commerce journey at 16. At 16, I was playing video games in my underwear and not going outside, essentially. That was my life at 16. So always impressed by that. So I'm excited to chat with you both about some of the findings here today, but I wanted to start for our audience by providing a little bit of context about where these talking points are coming from. And this is the 2021 Conversion Benchmark Report. So as the name suggests, we originally created the Conversion Benchmark Report to answer this very simple sounding question that we would hear from our customers and community members from time to time, which was like, what's a good conversion rate for a landing page in my industry? Or, basically how am I doing? And it sounds like a really simple question to answer, but it's actually hard to get objective data-backed answers. And so the genesis of the Conversion Benchmark Report was our desire to use our data to answer that question for our customers and for our audiences. And this is the biggest edition of this Conversion Benchmark Report we'd ever done. It used data from, let me just check, 33 million conversions across 44,000 landing pages. That's a lot of data. Thanks again, Floss, for handling all that data, to provide as accurate a picture as possible of the median conversion rates across 16 industries. And to clarify quickly, we call it the 2021 Conversion Benchmark Report because that's the year we published it. But the data in the report actually comes from between October 2019 and October 2020. So the pandemic, our topic for today, really is a possible factor in a lot of the numbers that we've been seeing. I'm going to call up this graph here. There we go. This is the centerpiece, I would say. This is our benchmark data. You can see here 16 different industries, and we provided both the median and the average grayed out in terms of what the average conversion rate for landing pages in those industries are. Sometimes people ask us about why we've chosen median rather than average. I'm not a stats guy, but average, as far as I know, average tends to be more impacted by outliers, by top performers, by landing pages that may not be performing that high. But so it tends to be a little bit less of an accurate representation of what most landing pages are doing. So we've chosen median as our guide throughout the rest of the report, but people do tend to also ask us for average, and so we've provided average here as well. So if you're looking for the big numbers, average tends to be a little bit higher than that median. So why did we decide to present these benchmarks? Well, I think benchmarks are important. They are a great source of competitive intelligence. They are perfect for setting targets, especially if you haven't done this before. If you don't have your own historical data, they can also be useful for creating a culture of improvement within your org. I always think of a scenario where somebody is like, I'm converting at 2%. Should I be bragging to my boss about this? Or should I be saying, whoa, we need to do something now? And if I'm able to compare how my landing pages are performing to the benchmarks in the industry, I can often make a case with stakeholders for taking the time to optimize my landing pages in order to deliver higher conversion rates. They highlight essentially what we like to call conversion potential, and that's the invisible gap between how you're doing and how you could be doing, right? If I'm converting at 2%, but I'm seeing that the median in my industry is 5.6%, I suddenly recognize, oh, there are steps that I could likely be taking to improve that. But of course, benchmarks aren't inherently actionable. They can be a call to action. They can remind me to take action, a signal that something needs to be done. But what action will actually boost your conversion rates can be eluding. That's not a word. Can elude and frustrate marketers whose performance is falling short of expectations. So one of the things we've done is we like to bring in experts, not just in this virtual event, but across our content to provide guidance. But another thing with this year's benchmark report is we wanted to provide actionable insights. We wanted to go beyond the benchmarks. Essentially, at Unbounce, we've invested heavily in machine learning and data science. And this allows us to provide not only some really cool AI-powered products and features in our builder, but also insights into what works and what doesn't when it comes to optimizing your landing pages. So yeah, we start with a question like, what's a good conversion rate? But this year's report can answer a lot of other questions that are more actionable. So one quick note, these insights and our recommendations are all based on aggregate data. So they describe what works for the average marketer, but they may not work in your specific niche. So throughout the report, Floss and Garrett, are encouraging marketers not to just make radical changes to their landing pages, but rather to use these insights to build quick variants, for one or two of your landing pages. Then either through A/B testing, if you've got the resources, the time, and the traffic, or using a tool like our smart traffic tool to automatically optimize your pages, test out and see how those variants resonate. For example, if you are looking at your landing pages and you're seeing that they are much longer than what we're recommending in the report, it doesn't take a lot of time to create a quick variant that is a shorter variant, and you're not committing to that change. You're testing it out, seeing if it's resonating or not. With something like smart traffic, it'll actually send people who are more likely to convert on the long version to the long version, and people who are more likely to convert on the short version to the short version. So it'll lead to a boost in your traffic overall anyway. And this is what people are starting to call conversion intelligence, the idea of pairing your marketing strategy with AI, rather than building variants based on hunches or best practices that may or may not be true any longer. You can take advantage of AI-powered tools and insights like the ones that we put in this report to help you build and optimize quicker and smarter. The reason we're here today, though, is to talk about COVID-19. And I already talked about how the data from this report definitely falls smack in the middle of the pandemic, October 2019 to October 2020. This report, we did not intend it. Like many of you, we were caught unaware by the pandemic, but it gave us this unique opportunity to really speculate about the impacts of COVID-19 on people's conversion rates. By comparing that data, we were able to include a specific section about the impacts of COVID-19. And it's this section in particular that we're going to be focusing on today with our amazing panelists. A couple quick caveats, though, before I bring them into the discussion. First, I want to acknowledge that the experience of the pandemic is different for different people. And depending upon where you live or who you are, it may be an existential threat, or it may be something you've hardly noticed. And we'll be talking a little bit about language around after the pandemic, or even talking about opportunities associated with the pandemic. But I think it's important to note that that may not be the reality for everyone in 2021. And we're all marketers here. We're going to be focusing on the marketing, but I think it's important also to acknowledge the human cost that continues to be real. Our hearts go out to the people across the world. And my mind has been on India and the rest of South Asia recently, who are struggling with COVID-19. Second, in the spirit of data literacy, I just want to say that it's important that we note that it's tough for us to definitively link anything to COVID-19. By its very nature, this data is correlational. So anything we say about how one thing is impacting another thing is informed speculation. The best thing we can do when presented with data, and I think this is true not just of the data in this report, but any data, is to subject it to human experience, to expert scrutiny, to embrace that kind of human side of marketing and bring that experience and critical thinking to bear on the data itself. And today we're doing just that. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into the specific findings around the pandemic. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring Ayat and Luke here today to provide their informed perspectives on some of the findings. So I wanted to check in with our panelists. Thank you both for listening to me ramble on for 15 minutes about the report. Hopefully our audience found that context useful. Are we both still awake?
Yeah, we're good.
Still alive and kicking. All right.
No, that was great, Colin. Thank you.
I find the data stuff fascinating, but I never know for sure if other people do. I have this self-conscious thing in the back of my head. I'm like, is this really boring? you can just tell me if I'm boring you. But it really provides a window into these things that, like, you know, a lot of like anecdotes that people post on Twitter about how their marketing is doing doesn't really do for me. You know, I really need that data. I need that grounding in reality. So, like, my understanding is that both of you are working predominantly with e-com marketers with their boots on the ground, so to speak. And I'd be interested, just before we dive into those particular points, in just getting your perspectives on the pandemic. So, Ayat, I wanted to start with you. Like, what kind of year was 2020 for the marketers that you were working with?
So, you know, and I guess you already mentioned this, Colin, it wasn't necessarily the same for every single industry. It depended highly on the industry, it depended on what they were selling, et cetera. But I guess for the most part, I mean, I think pretty much, at least in my experience, most people saw a halt in kind of like that March, April timeframe. And things slowed down for everybody. And it was just like, what's going to happen next? But then things kind of started opening up really, like, you know, towards May, June timeframe. It was like almost like a pent up demand that people had, and they started kind of shopping a lot more online. And so at least for a lot of our e-commerce clients, they saw growth. They've seen, you know, like anywhere between like a 40 to 60% growth in terms of conversion rate and just sales in general. So that's been actually very positive. I mean, of course, again, like, you know, I'm telling you from the context of the digital perspective, but of course, a lot of these same clients do have brick and mortars, and they had to shutter a lot of stores and do a lot of different things. So they had to adapt to the situation. But you know, we did see kind of like that boost, even within my own industry. So we do conversion rate optimization. We saw a boost, like a demand for the service that we provide, because again, I think there's a lot more focus on that digital aspect. So you saw a lot more companies wanting to make sure that they're optimizing the experiences to ensure that there's really more, you know, like they're increasing conversion rates on their landing pages and on their websites overall. So the other kind of interesting point to the pandemic was that there's definitely a correlation to when a lot of people, again, I'm talking about the US specifically, they got the relief. So if they got relief from the government, you saw kind of some, you know, some of these e-commerce companies just basically see like a massive growth, essentially. Like people were waiting for that to happen for like some auxiliary purchases that they were waiting on making. So we have actually one client that sells gaming PCs. So they just saw kind of like this like overall boost, you know, from like selling $250,000 a month to selling like $1 million a month. And, you know, it was just kind of like really massive growth for them, but it really did correlate with when those relief checks came in for a lot of people. That's when they could kind of do that spending. So it's kind of interesting to see. I mean, I really didn't anticipate to see such a boost and growth in the industry, but it's been fairly positive for a lot of our clients.
Great. Yeah, I know that like one of the reports that I looked at estimated that US consumers spent like more than 44% more online in 2020 than the previous year. And yeah, part of me would be like, well, wouldn't you, you know, in times of uncertainty, wouldn't you want to like save things? Wouldn't you want to tuck it away? Maybe not buy that gaming PC this year, but definitely, in my experience, everybody's taking up some kind of hobby. So I'm sure that drove some of the e-com as well.
Especially Luke, if they had something planned, you know, Colin, like, you know, a lot of these people, for example, had like trips planned, or and they're saving up for those things. And so then when it doesn't happen, they're like, okay, well, what am I going to do with all this money that I had saved up for this particular thing? And so they'll spend it on something else. But sorry to cut you off again.
Staycation. No, do cut me off. Luke, I'm curious, like you're located in the UK.
Yeah.
Has the story you've been seeing out been similar to Ayat's? Has it been generally a positive one?
Yeah, my neck is tired from all the nodding I've been doing as Ayat's been speaking. It's brilliant. But yeah, we've seen really similar kind of impacts. But what I will say is we've also had the mix of Brexit to kind of contend with as well. So it's been quite bittersweet for a lot of clients, and equally friends and family who have reached out. And I think, you know, you've kind of got on the one side this huge growth in demand for products, whether it's essentials like food, especially tin goods in the UK. When Brexit came out, everyone was like panicked by all your food because, you know, fresh produce could stop at the border and all that kind of stuff. So there was a huge demand there. And what we saw specifically in the UK was Heinz built a D2C, direct-to-consumer site selling those favorites and essentials like tomato soups, baked beans, all the good stuff that us as Brits love. And that was a bit of a peace offering, if you like, a way of getting that. Now, Heinz had never been a D2C company up until that point, but they found an opportunity. They noticed Brexit was a thing. There was a distribution situation, and they wanted to provide a solution. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of it has been the same. But I also have fortunately, a client actually in the world of COVID testing. So right at the epicenter of the pandemic and supplying that. And what was really interesting is, when you spoke about February and March and maybe the beginning of April, sort of this huge, everyone's holding their breath, let's spend nothing because we don't know what's around the corner. And then kind of, as people start to, I don't think anything really changed in the state of COVID, but I think people's patience were wearing thin, boredom struck, people wanting to, got kids to entertain, homeschooling, all this sort of stuff is in the mix. There was a huge spike, and the exact same thing happened in COVID testing. And then another spike actually at the end of the first wave. So in the UK, we've had 3 waves of lockdowns. And at every single one of those alleviations of lockdowns, things have really swung from online to high street and then back again. And it's this huge pendulum motion of, we're going outside to the beer garden. No, we're staying indoors and we're doing arts and crafts. And it's been incredible. But what I will say is, I think specifically in the UK, but I'm sure it's a global situation as well, is you can have this huge spike in demand, this incremental revenue, and then you can't fulfill the orders because of Brexit, because of distribution, because of a number of things. So that can really jeopardize your entire integrity as a brand, your customer service levels and all this sort of good stuff. So it's great to have the cash in, but then being able to manage supply chain and that kind of hand-holding process, especially if you like drop ship or something like that, is a whole different dynamic.
That's really interesting. One of the themes you started with was talking about Heinz, and I just want to follow up on that. Have both of you seen a lot of our customers are small and medium businesses, but have you seen a lot of activity from these big names who maybe haven't taken e-commerce or D2C particularly seriously, shifting into those spaces over the course of 2020, or is Heinz just an exception to the rule?
I think there's been loads. I mean, I personally don't really like the corporate environment very much because of how much bureaucracy and delays and things like that. I'm quite an impatient person at the best of times. I want things kind of done almost immediately. So it's got its pros, got its cons. That's for another webinar. But what I will say is the amount of money that has just become available, it's almost like before you had to kind of tease it out of decision makers and create an incredible pitch and rally your team, and then it goes to finance and legal and all this kind of stuff. It got to a situation where almost within 6 months, the amount of transformation that people could do in such a short amount of time really kind of told us that a lot of what corporate, a lot of the stuff we hear in corporate America, in corporate Britain, in corporate Europe, a lot of it is nonsense. Like, if you need to move quick to make a business survive, you can. And there's been companies that have died, of course, we understand that, through already struggling pre-pandemic, and then this was the final blow, or companies that kind of realized that their revenue stream had completely dried up and had to switch and alternate to selling something online. We've seen companies being born out of nowhere with huge amounts of funding. And I think what that kind of teaches us is that, the excuse where things have to take forever, especially in digital, is to a point null and void. We can't use that excuse anymore.
You alluded in what you were saying to the fact that yes, there's been a lot of spending and a lot of growth, but that's not 100% uniform. There have been some struggles involved, and that kind of makes me think about the first data point that I wanted to explore here, which is one of the things we saw in the data we were looking at is this story that we've been calling it the story of winners and losers, but it's really this story of this widening gap between the top performers and the rest of the pack. I took this graph from the e-commerce one, where it's not actually as dramatic as it is with some of the other industries. But if you look at the data on the left-hand side from the 2020 report versus the data from the most recent report that is impacted by the pandemic, you can see that the spread of performers actually grows. So this is a box plot, and that bar there above the I wish I could highlight things here, but the line there that goes out from the box is indicating the top 25% of pages. And in most industries, we saw that line grow longer and further away from everybody else. So, whether that's due to instability in the market or shifting preferences, some industries and some businesses clearly benefited, while others really slipped. And so there has been that increase in variance between the two, between the winners and the losers. I'm a Canadian. I don't like to call people losers, and I think that that's a bad word to use. So I just mean that some people had those opportunities or were positioned already to take advantage of them. Some of them had a culture. I think, something that Luke was kind of alluding to with talking about like these big corporate cultures, maybe like being too much in their own heads about how to do things. Some were positioned to really act, and some weren't. Luke, I'm curious, does this sort of narrative, this data story, reflect your experience talking to e-com marketers? Why do you think we're seeing patterns like this in the data?
Personally, I think, and this is purely from a client perspective and also my personal one from shopping, I think pre-pandemic, and even maybe now, because I don't think we're really out of it, we're just kind of living around it. You had options. You had a wide breadth of retailers to choose from. You had price volatility. You had to hunt around for a discount code. From my experience in the UK, you buy it at the first place you find it, even if it's extortionate money, because if you need it enough, you'll justify it. So as a result, you've got less choice. You have probably a higher desire to own whatever it is you're purchasing, whether it's, for me personally, it was like PlayStation 2 games off eBay, because I've got an old PS2 console in the loft. I didn't want to go and spend big money on a brand new console because, what's the situation going to be for work when I'm in February? Who knew? So yeah, I was like buying up all these PS2 games that were almost the same kind of money that they would have been, maybe 15 years before. But that didn't matter because I'm locked in my house and the kids need something to do. So I guess my point is the demand was greater and the supply was smaller. And I appreciate that you can't use that rule against everyone, because there's going to be like, there's going to be like building merchants, or probably like a ghost town, the high street, and that sort of thing, But I just think, because there was less variety and a greater demand for some things, that could have driven it.
Yeah, I sympathize with your PlayStation 2 experience. I was trying to buy used office furniture, and it became impossible to find anything because everybody was buying it up. And then I got desperate, went to IKEA, and there was nothing at IKEA either. So quite the experience. Have the marketers that you've talked to experienced this kind of instability? Does this align with your experiences? And what particular industries have stood out to you as more or less affected by the pandemic?
I think, and a lot of times when we're kind of doing any type of optimization, by the way, we're always looking at those. There's like certain factors that you have control over, which are like the website centric factors. That's what we call them. And then there's really like those customer centric factors that we just have no control, like the economy or, COVID or whatever is kind of happening in that orbit. We don't really have control over it. But I think the key players that really succeeded within, during COVID were those companies that were really kind of able to adapt to the change. For example, we had one client that was selling POS systems, but it became irrelevant at that, so that's point of sale for any restaurant type business. It became, there was no more foot traffic coming into the restaurant. So they just had to adapt. And within that realm, they also had a tool that they were selling, which was online ordering. So they adapted and made sure that all their focus and all their marketing dollars went towards that rather than the POS systems, because it just didn't make sense anymore. So, I think those companies that were able to kind of do that adaptation, they were able to kind of succeed and ride the wave and, actually build upon their business a little bit better than others. And that's why you kind of see this variance. Another example, for example, is a client that we had that sold golf lessons online. And for them, it kind of hit around the time, they're already like a very seasonal business. And it hit around the time when really that's their high season. That's when COVID kind of hit. So they just, again, you'd see just their landing page traffic. Nobody was searching for those terms anymore. Like everything just kind of dwindled for them. Whereas, for example, in-home dance lessons, just another client that we had, shot up completely because people were just like, oh, well, we have nothing to do. We can't go out. This is the best kind of date night that we can have. Let's learn how to dance at home. So, you know, it's like kind of industry specific, as well as how companies were really able to kind of adapt and change their messaging and change, you know, a little bit of their focus to make sure they're addressing the concerns of the customers.
Right. Yeah, I want to go back to this point about adapting a little bit later in our talk, because I think we've seen some evidence of this in some of the industries that we're going to highlight. But let's say I'm watching this virtual event, and I'm a marketer who, you know, I've looked at the report, I've seen this graph, and I'm feeling like I'm on that losing end of the spectrum. I've really struggled in 2020 to adapt my whatever it is, my business to the digital world. What can I do? And this is for both of you, whoever wants to take it. What can I do to ensure that I don't repeat that same pattern in 2021? Are things going to change back? Are they just going to go back if I've just been waiting for things to open up?
I don't know if they're necessarily going to go back. I mean, I think they might go back to a semblance of normalcy, but I think that there are some things in place that might stay forever. I mean, that's kind of how I see things happening, but I'm not 100% sure. Like, you never know how things are going to change. But I do think that, of course, like COVID taught that we can't expect, okay, this is how it's going to be in the future. You just never know. So you just have to kind of like live in that moment where, you know, you don't know how things are going to be. So you just have to try to provide whatever it is in that moment. So what we recommend for a lot of our clients is, and what we do for a lot of our clients is, we do a lot of talking to customers, because essentially that's where you're going to get a lot of insights into, well, maybe I can change my messaging, or maybe I can change the way that I'm offering this so that it really addresses their needs a little bit better. We find it's very useful, and you're able to get a lot more information on even where to market your specific, you know, product, because again, that's how they're searching, that's how they're looking for it, that's, you know, what's on their mind. So there's so much. We actually follow this methodology called Jobs to be Done, and that's how we conduct our interviews, and we're able to extract a lot of really meaningful information that helps us kind of, again, create a more adaptable type of you know, brand that resonates with customers. So I would say that it's sometimes like underrepresented, and not a lot of people do it enough. They think that, you know, they're not going to get the right answers. There's obviously like a way to be able to extract that information from customers, but it's definitely very useful, and it could, I think, be one of those activities that a lot of companies can do fairly quickly and get some answers.
Luke, I saw you nodding your head there again. Yeah.
Yeah, everything I was saying is brilliant. I genuinely think that when it comes to tackling any problem, to be really holistic about it, start with the most simplest thing, because that's often where the solution may lie. So Ayat's example, talking to your customers, right? Like, so many people start in GA. So many people start with a technical thing. Is the site fast enough? The price is good enough? The product images, the descriptions, they may all be problems. But rather than making assumptions on your customer's behalf, yeah, go talk to the people who are spending money. But I think to add to that, one thing that I personally love to dive into is site search, especially at the opening of COVID, right? So I'll give you one perfect example. There's a retailer here in the UK called Holland & Barrett. They're kind of like maybe Whole Foods, so like vitamins, supplements, kind of stuff like that. And normally one of the first go-tos at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Because everyone's kind of after additional vitamins, or, you know, some kind of hand sanitizer, that kind of stuff. But if they had an unprecedented amount of people searching for the word or words around coronavirus, and every single time they did that, the search results page was no results found, because they have nothing on their website at that time where it broke out that corresponded to any of that. So my point here is, understand how people are searching, because it can change all of the time. Black Friday is another particular seasonal one where search and demand blows up. But just properly understand how your customers are searching, misspellings, different languages, sentiments, especially in Germany, and in different languages where you've got accents and interpretation of spaces. You'd like to think that it's done out of the box for a lot of third-party search providers, but it isn't always. And people who are searching on your site, I'm talking about the site search rather than Google and SEO right now, as we know, are a heck of a lot more likely to convert than people who don't. So talk to your customers. I think that's really, really good advice. And then make it easy for them to buy. And I know it sounds really cliche, but your site search is so huge. Just those things.
That's a great piece of advice, and I think something that people could look at today after this virtual event. Take a look at what people have been searching for if you haven't already. I wanted to get some perspective from the two of you on another data point that came up here, and kind of, I don't know if it puzzled us, but it was kind of an interesting one. Despite that instability, or maybe because in some ways of the instability, we saw growth year over year, both in terms of overall traffic and conversion rates across most industries. There were some exceptions. The events and leisure category, as you might imagine, took a pretty hard hit. But from the standpoint of both performance and demand, or at least traffic, many of the campaigns we analyzed in 2020 did better than the ones in 2019. At the same time, though, we saw a dramatic cutback in the number of landing pages published across some of these industries in terms of the proportion of pages published. So travel, real estate, events all saw these double-digit reductions on the amount of landing pages being published. Even in some industries where we'd expect maybe less volatility due to SaaS, due to the pandemic, like SaaS, like SaaS or like finance, there seemed to be a softening of digital marketing activities, at least in terms of building landing pages. As you can see here, actually, since you're both focused on a lot of e-com stuff, e-com landing pages grew by 2.4%, which is not huge considering how much opportunity has created, like some of the things we've been talking about. But I'm curious, what do you believe accounts for this drop off in some of these industries?
I kind of think maybe a couple of things. So I think that at least what I see for a lot of marketers, they're trying to consolidate as much as they can in terms of publishing like lots of different landing pages versus maybe having a single landing page that dynamically just directs the customer. Maybe you're switching out a few elements and directs them to where they need to go. So I think that's maybe could be a small part of it. I don't know the again, like what that correlation is between it being during the year of COVID versus before. So I think that could maybe be a part of it. I think also like thinking about just Google has had some particular like different rules, and I think that lots of marketers are adapting to that as well, and I think that's also changing. It was interesting. I had actually like this PPC chat with a bunch of really smart marketers, and we were talking about the fact that like also there's a lot of for example, a lot of marketers are seeing, especially within paid advertising, they're seeing that a lot of their traffic, the way that Google is displaying it, again, they're having less control over what keywords are being, searched, and the fact that people are actually clicking on those ads, and it's really like junk traffic when it comes to that the customer base and who they're trying to target. So, for example, you have these large companies like Airbnb and whatnot, where they slashed some of their PPC budget, and they still didn't see necessarily an impact or a drop in terms of conversion rates, which is telling you, that again, large companies, they have the flexibility to do these types of things, whereas the small companies, not so much. But nonetheless, that kind of is an indicator of, again, like having these too many keywords as well as, lots of landing pages. I do believe that there is an effort from a lot of marketers to try to reduce some of that and consolidate some of that to a certain extent. So I think that could be partially why we're seeing that.
Interesting. Luke, what's your take on this?
I think I have more questions than answers, to be honest, but to purely speculate, I'd probably say it might even be at the surface a cost-saving exercise, because normally in conversations, right, and I think we've all been there, regardless of what vertical you work in, marketing is normally the most volatile channel in terms of reduction of spend, right? So the first thing to go is normally sales, marketing, which is ironic because they're obviously the fuel for business. But that's, again, time for another webinar. But what I will say is it looks like there's a correlation between the industries that were impacted the hardest. So, of course, travel being one of the, I guess, the epitomes of COVID. And just the sheer reduction of like, right, we need to save costs, we need to shut things down, turn things off, remove subdomains. And then the other side, you kind of have almost like some of the bigger winners increased in doing that. But I also believe that because of the need to pivot to either save yourself from demise or capitalize on an opportunity, it's where landing pages are really, really important, or a third-party land page provider really comes in. Because rather than going through product teams and designers and all that sort of stuff, it's just like, you spend half a day wireframing this thing, getting the designers involved, and by the end of a couple of business days, you've got something to work with. And I think in times like that, where gyms were closing and opening almost all the time, news would bring out different states of lockdown on a weekly basis, you needed that immediacy to be able to pivot. So I just think it's about saving the business and protecting vulnerabilities. So, but it's difficult, isn't it? I think I've got like 5 questions I want to throw at you for this, which we haven't got time for. But I think this just kind of makes a point that sometimes data you can interpret in many different ways, and it's important to make sure you've got context right.
Yeah, absolutely, Luke. And I want to emphasize, I think you used the word speculation there, and that's what we're doing. Some of this speculation is more informed than others, but it always throws up these really curious mysteries that I want to investigate further. And I think we could go deeper into this one for sure. But you brought up fitness, and so I wanted to jump to one of the outliers here. If we look at this particular graph, we can see that fitness and nutrition actually saw growth in the proportion of pages by 7.4%, beat out every other industry. And when I saw that, I was like, but the gyms around here have been closed for months. I've walked by yoga studios. They gave it their try, I think, to go digital. Like they did some digital classes. They would do it outside in the park, but then winter hit. Some of them have completely given up the ghost. And I think, it's hard to compete on a yoga class when there's YouTube channels that just give this stuff away for free. Really tricky for them. So when anecdotally, when I saw this, I was like, I would have thought that fitness and nutrition would have been impacted, maybe not to the same degree, but in the same way that like an events and leisure or travel, because it does often involve people getting together in different ways. But that hasn't been the story. We've seen this growth. The median conversion rate went from 4 to 5.6%. So conversion rates went up and expressed as an average, because people are always like, where's the average? I don't care about median. Expressed as an average, this industry converted at 13.2% in 2020, which is one of the better performing industries that we covered. Luke, any ideas why fitness and nutrition, and we've grouped them together, by the way, saw such a boom during this pandemic, at least insofar as creating landing pages and conversion rates?
Yeah, I think this is 2 things. One is panic and fear. Because, oh my gosh, like the gyms aren't open, therefore we're not providing value for our club members, therefore no revenue, therefore redundancies, no more business. The other side of that is the necessity to continue to exercise and enjoy the outdoor space became almost like the new television, became the new Netflix, because everyone's kind of itching. Digital's just all you're about now. You have no way to get out. So there's almost like the ability, the immediate requirement to be creative in that space. So we had, number one in the world, like Joe Wicks just absolutely killing it with his Joe Wicks at home workouts, and so many other people doing the same kind of thing. We had fitness companies and a client of mine actually locally who were hiring out gym equipment to just try and make ends meet. We had nutritional, I wouldn't even know if mental health fits into that fitness and nutrition category, but there's a whole space there. And equally at the same time, there's a bit of a cash cow in that as well. So the gyms are closed for sure, but there's nothing wrong with personal training in the park, right? There's nothing wrong with that sort of thing. So I genuinely think there's been a huge amount of kind of panic It's like gyms are closed. Oh my God, corporate companies, gyms, that is their sole area of income. But on the other side, there's a lot of scope to really be creative with it. And one particular one for my gym was to kind of, you can cancel your membership if you want. We're not going to hold you to it, even though you're in contract, or you can pause it. And a lot of gyms jumped on that bandwagon, because if you can't afford it, if you're struggling as an individual because you've been made redundant or whatever, having the option to just pause your membership until the world allows you to go back. All of these things. So that's why I think there's so much creative energy and so much of an increment in that pages in that space.
That's great. I love that point about like it was almost like the threat felt so big to fitness and nutrition that they felt compelled to adapt very quickly, versus some industries where maybe the threat felt a little bit more nebulous, a little less like we have to move immediately on that. Does that track with your own experiences? And as a, in addition to that, if I'm, a traditional brick and mortar business, is there anything I can learn from this apparent success around fitness and nutrition?
Well, it's interesting because actually we have a couple of clients that are within the space, and even for example, there's this one client that they sell kettlebells and weights and whatnot, and they're just completely running out of the material. And I actually my brother works out a lot, and so he was trying to order stuff and he just couldn't find anything anywhere online. So it's interesting to see that, of course, there was this boost. I think that people being at home maybe were a little bit more stir crazy, and they figured, I'm not going to be able to move outside. I might as well move in my home. So, kind of build that new option there. But in terms of what brick and mortars can kind of learn when it comes to just the fitness industry, I think it's interesting how COVID hit certain industries. I see a comment here by one of the attendees that's saying that it's sad that the pandemic took to make the population realize they needed to be more active and eat more healthy. But, it is those are the kind of impacts that COVID had that maybe changed things. I don't know that a brick and mortar company can necessarily learn much, but in the sense that, it's just the situation, the fact that COVID presented to us where people felt the need, they had that visibility of themselves, they had more time. That's kind of a really key thing, is that we were all stuck at home. There's a lot more time to do the things that we always say we want to do, but we can never get to. It's amazing how much time, just going into the office actually takes away from the other things that you can possibly do in your life, and you can still be as productive. So I think that, just in general, it's just the nature of how COVID affected this particular industry, and they kind of were able to see that growth as a result.
Great, yeah, I definitely feel that. I appreciate the extra time for all my weird hobbies that I've taken up over the course of this. Gone back to some things from childhood that I just when I was a kid, I liked painting little miniatures. Why don't I do that? So I'm sure some of those industries have also seen similar growth around that as well. But let me jump to the next little bit of data here. And we don't have a graph to support this one, but what I'm talking about really here is the column on the right, which is that we noticed that desktop traffic for a fair number of industries actually went up quite a bit. SaaS, business services, media, travel, medical practitioners, and home improvement all saw increases in desktop traffic over mobile, sometimes significant increases over that. And that sort of feels a little counter to some of the messaging we've heard out there for years now about more and more traffic coming from mobile. You should be optimizing for mobile. I think some marketers really they design mobile first. And because of the pandemic, and I think potentially because we were suddenly at our desks, at our computers, rather than as my day usually went on the bus on my phone, a lot of the traffic seemed to shift. It just goes to show that there might be a kind of risk of going all in terms of optimizing for a particular device, and I think that's true also of traffic sources. That's kind of one size fits all approach. Well, anyway, I'm curious, what's the number one thing to do number one thing that marketers can do to ensure that they're creating like an optimal experience for visitors, like regardless of the device or the channel they're coming from? Or I don't want to say like, let's say something similar but better than the pandemic happens that just radically changes how my visitors are acting overnight. You know, maybe a shift in technology or something. How do I ensure that I'm prepared to adapt to that?
So, I mean, I agree that, you know, Colin, it's we've seen like a shift and a change in terms of how visitors are actually coming to different landing pages and different websites. But I will say this, you know, like I still do see the trend that it is, you know, like mobile, like, because honestly, like I'm just going to say in general that, like, you know, even with, for example, like think about like elderly people that might not even have a desktop. I think that they were utilizing their mobile devices a lot more. Actually, it's interesting because like a lot of customers that never typically did use, like they relied on using their desktop either at their workplace or whatever it is, then, you know, they were kind of using their mobile device. But nonetheless, I never think that you should ever go into optimization with looking at just one device. You have to look at your traffic. You have to kind of understand where they're coming from, what the conversion rates are looking like per device. Like, you know, we always talk about this when whenever I'm giving some sort of like a talk or I'm at a conference, I always say like segment your data, like especially when it comes to device, because they're two different experiences completely, and you want to make sure that you're monitoring how they're performing on mobile versus on desktop. So that would be kind of like, you know, that key thing is that every company needs to make sure that when they're looking at data, please never look at it as a whole. When you're looking at analytics, at least like at a minimum segment per device, because that's really critical to kind of give you, again, like that insight into how they're performing per device. And then, you know, like one thing that I always find, and this is whenever we work with any type of client, is that the number of companies that actually don't really go through their site themselves and like kind of see what the experience is from a customer's perspective is just mind-boggling. It's just like, well, you know, it's there. It's the website's there for you. Go through it on a mobile device, see what they're experiencing. Go through it on a desktop device, see what they're experiencing. Then you can pick up some of those UX issues that they're experiencing and that they might be struggling with. And, you know, those are what we call really like when we categorize different problems on a website, we'll call those fix right away, you know, like stop the bleeding type, you know, situations. It's so easy. Like I see that there's something that's not functional, or, you know, like a link or a button that's taking them somewhere else. So always have these periodic reviews of your site and go walking through it and actually making a purchase and seeing what that whole entire experience is like. And you'll really see like kind of a world of a difference in terms of how that is. And I would do it for desktop, and I would do it for mobile, and make sure that you kind of really see both of those experiences, and hopefully you'll be able to see what's happening. And just in terms of segmentation, again, I would also look at like, you know, what browsers they're using, what types of devices they're using, because like sometimes you might be surprised that you have a segment of traffic that might be quite significant that's using a device that maybe you're really not optimized for, like a smaller, like, you know, iPhone, or, you know, like an earlier edition or whatever it is. So you just have to make sure that you're monitoring that data. It's all that is accessible via analytits.
Right. Yeah. So the future is still mobile first.
Yeah, I'm a
hold you to that,
big believer, and you know, most of our clients' data supports that. So
yeah, absolutely. Then I should say the fitness and nutrition was one of those that was not impacted by that, and we see mobile continuing to go up even when people are stuck at home. Largely, I think because a lot of people are coming to these fitness landing pages from social media, and they use the apps on their phone to go to social media sites rather than their browsers anyway. So yeah, Luke, you know, beyond like, let's imagine that like I'm just starting out and I don't have a lot of data, and I don't necessarily you know, I don't necessarily know. Is there any way I can kind of anticipate where my visitors will be more likely to be coming from? I think, you know, like Ayat's messages, like make sure you're covering all your bases, but I'm curious what you would recommend.
Yeah, so I don't know how accurate this is, but there's a report in Google Analytics which gives you averages per industry, which is helpful. But what I'd also probably take a look at is just make assumption on the worst device. So think about the oldest device and oldest browser combination you can use and work worst case forward. And the way I like to think about it is if there's a tangible piece of advice I can give to the attendees, it's use Browser Stack. Like Browser Stack write it down, like say it out loud, do what you got to do. But it's an incredible tool because what it allows you to do is, rather than using like emulators or something in Inspect Element where you just use emulators in the browser development tools, using real devices over VPN. And what that basically allows you to do is use something as old as like an iPhone. I mean, I haven't got an iPhone now, but let's say an iPhone 5, if that's something that's still used, or an SE, for example. Work with that and see what it's like. So the smallest kind of real estate, but then work your way up to like the latest, this is nothing particularly fancy, but it's a large screen, and work your way around that. Some things to take into consideration is like filters typically get used a heck of a lot less on category pages on mobile than they will do on desktop. So how do you build that experience? How would someone who needs larger font work? But then also think about accessibility depending on your vertical, right? So I have a client in the world of pharmaceutical where the demographic is typically quite mature, so 50 and upwards. Think about colour blindness, think about ease of reading. There's quite a lot of things to think about, and there's a lot of things to go after. But I'd just make sure that you're accommodating for Internet Explorer for sure. What's the new thing? What's the Microsoft? Is it Edge?
Edge
browsers. And just cover all your bases with devices, and Browser Stack will really help you to get there.
Great. I think our audience loved that piece of advice because I saw a lot of emojis floating up there. So thank you, Luke. I want to jump to the next one data point here. It is, we've already seen this particular graph showing, in e-commerce that sadness and fear, words associated with sadness and fear, just to be exact, relate to lower conversion rates on e-commerce landing pages. One of the interesting things, though, is when we compare 2019 to 2020, in general, we saw notable increases in negative sentiments like sadness and fear, including big spikes in language related to disgust. I think disgust on the landing pages we analyzed rose by 47.7%, which is a strange thing to say. 47.7% more disgust. Fear and sadness, all of these increased, despite the fact that there's either no clear evidence or sometimes no clear evidence that it relates to more conversion rates, or even evidence that it relates to lower conversion rates. We can see it here in this graph here. This might be an obvious question, but what accounts for the rise in negative sentiments in landing page copy, like sentiments like disgust and fear? And why do you think they didn't work for marketers and their customers?
I think a lot of companies tried to ride the COVID wave in the sense of, oh, we're here for you, we're going to do this for you, or, I guess some of the language relating to COVID. And I think for very quickly, a lot of customers got very sick of seeing that. So that could possibly, again, I don't know, again, how also this is, how you guys have collected that data specifically, in terms of the fear and the sadness and what you're evaluating on a page to, I guess, just determine how it's being plotted. But again, I would just kind of go back to that, the fact that, a lot of people tried to utilize it and maybe it worked for a really short period, but people got sick of it very quickly. And a lot of those sentiments that they included were related to, like sadness and fear and, how, again, like whatever product or service they're providing could possibly alleviate some of that. So, that's kind of the thought that I would have there. In general, though, just a CRO practice, being kind of just negative in your copy doesn't necessarily have a positive impact, at least at what we've seen. And this is pre-COVID. So I think you just have to kind of really be careful with that. And it's, depends on, it's interesting. Actually, there was this one client, they do readathons. And so we did an experiment actually where we tested kind of the negative impact that the lack of reading can have on students. So this was actually in education. And I know that you mentioned actually, Colin, at the beginning of your call, like, the joy sentiment doesn't necessarily resonate. And it was interesting because really the negative emotions that we displayed on the landing page, where we kind of talked about, if you don't read, this can happen to your child. They can become obese, and they can, like I don't know, there was like several different stats that we provided, and like it actually had a really positive impact, like in terms of conversions and people really like loving the concept of the readathon and signing up. So side kind of note there. I know it's not related to e-commerce in this particular situation.
No, but that's really interesting. And I was just thinking about how very early in the pandemic, that supercut of commercials using the phrase "unprecedented times" went around. Did you both see that? It was like,
oh yeah,
it was like, what was it? It was like April or May that came out, and we were already sick of like a lot of this language around the pandemic. And now we're a year later, and still in the pandemic and still hearing that language. There's like a lot of fatigue around these things for sure. Luke, obviously we're not all out of that pandemic situation yet, and there are many markets where it's going to have a lasting impact. But focusing on industries and places that are entering something like a rebound period, or at least a reopening period, what kinds of sentiments do you think messaging offers do you think will resonate best in let's say the second half of 2021 in those places?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about being cautious and being transparent, and just being honest, because I also think that the sentiment on fear and negativity is a cultural thing, in the sense of, depending on where you are in the world, can be interpreted in a very different way. So in the UK, and I don't know what it's like in the US because I don't watch too much US television, but it's kind of like, the cleaning manufacturers or the cleaning brands like Domestos, that's always their play, right? Like, oh, you've washed your clothes for 30 years. Well, guess what? If you don't use our Domestos products, you're probably going to get sick. Like, come on, I've been washing my clothes just fine, and now you're going to bring a TV advert out to say that I might die if I don't use my 99.9% fabric stuff. The point I guess I'm trying to get at, it depends on who your audience is, your vertical, your beliefs, and I guess the cultural differences and that sort of thing. But I would say what never seems to fail, time and time again, whether it's relationships, whether it's business, whether it's talking to your consumers, is just being cautious and transparent. And the cautious thing is probably more of a British thing, because we just, that's how we are. But if you're worried about, if you haven't got stock, or you're in a situation where you're doing everything you can to help with social distancing, or if you haven't got a beer garden, but that's the only way you can open a pub, then just say we can't open yet, rather than just kind of giving people false hope or making people feel scared for going to, for doing things that they want to do, because that then inspires guilt, and maybe anger and other emotions you don't really want to be associated with. Just be transparent. That's my advice.
Great, I love that. Okay, let's sorry. Let's jump to our last little talking point here. Less about data. Actually, I'll keep this one small because we don't really need to see that. Unprecedented times, the new normal, all of these things, they've inspired me to ask you a completely unfair question. I am not going to hold you to this, but I would like to get your prediction for the future. Patently unfair. I promise this will not appear in any content that we create with your name and a quote, and definitely what you're saying. But Luke, what does the next 2 years look like for e-com marketers?
I actually think, and this is a crazy theory of mine, but I actually think what's going to happen is it's going to be like a pendulum shift, where the retail will make a bounce back. I don't know when I say a bounce back, I don't mean to pre-COVID levels. I mean it will be cool again. But I think retailers are going to have to work hard to build experiences. So I think there's a lot to be said about buying really desirable things like cars, designer bags, that kind of immersive experience where you go in, you sit down, you're greeted by somebody, given a glass of, whether you drink or you don't, you're given a glass of something, some snacks. That is something you cannot replicate online. And I think when you have too much of something, you always want maybe the opposite of what that is. And I just have a sense that the retail side, the high street side of things is really going to make a comeback. And I think it will be the birth of real omnichannel, because omnichannel has been one of those words that we love to throw around in the boardroom, let's be honest, but no one ever really sticks to it. But I've got the feeling now that, something's just brewing there, and someone's really going to nail VIP experiences, omnichannel and retail, and kind of capitalizing on people getting back to normal life. And so got absolutely zero data on that, but that's just my hunch.
That's what it's all about. Just hunches. We'll put a box around it. This is just a hunch, everybody. But I love an informed prediction for sure. I had same question.
So I think we've seen kind of like a rise of a lot of these different brands going more D2C, like really like just a boom in the D2C kind of space. And I think the D2C space is really interesting because I think it's given the chance for a lot of smaller brands to really create something very meaningful for people. And, again, like you can, there's so much emphasis again on that brand and on that messaging as a kind of organization as a whole. Personally, obviously we do CRO, and one of the big things when I look at conversion rate optimization is, that brand message and that brand voice is so critical. And I do believe in the next 2 years, it's going to become even more important. If you don't have something that really resonates with your customer, you're just losing out, because people are looking for more meaning in everything that they buy. Like, so the type of organization, what are they also engaged in? That's kind of important to people when they're kind of looking at that. And I think that, having a really clear brand message and something that really resonates and catering that to the customer is going to be a really big thing in the next couple of years. And I just, again, like just seeing also that boom of the D2C kind of industry, like kind of gives me that sense that, it's kind of moving more in that direction. All these smaller brands are popping up, and they all have really cool messages and really cool products that people can access. So I don't know. I mean, it's that's I think like what maybe like the next couple of years would look like within e-commerce. But yeah, like it is just a major speculation. I don't know.
Maybe we can have both of you back in 2 years, and we can talk about your predictions.
And then you're gonna hold us to it.
I promise not to, but maybe I'm a liar. We'll see. So we're at about 15 minutes from the end here. So I'm gonna suspend my questions and take us into opening the floor for a few questions. As a reminder to our audience, if you have questions that are specific to the report, for example, I had raised like the question about like the data around the sentiment analysis and how, like, if you want more details on that, please ask that question in the chat. If you have questions for our panelists, use the questions tab on the right-hand menu, and our moderators will drop them into the moderation channel for me. And I've got one here. Here's the first one. I just got to scroll to it. And this is for both of you. How do you go about conducting market research beyond your own customer base?
Do you know what? I take the floor with this one. This is, I think this is definitely your bag from what you said.
Right. So I don't know if this is Heather's question, maybe. We do, like, for example, whenever we have a client, again, like it could be e-commerce, SaaS, we work with like different types of organization, but majority are e-commerce, but we will tap into their own customers to kind of really try to extract a little bit more data. So the way that we do it is we actually ask our own client first reach out to the customers, send them a survey that would qualify those specific customers, and then that survey would lead them to a link if they're qualified, where they can like set up basically an interview with us, a one-on-one. And we usually give some sort of an incentive as well, because like people don't want to get on the phone with somebody for 45 minutes. So we usually give them either some sort of like a gift card or like a percentage off or something like that the client can actually provide, so that we can really get on the phone with them. But yeah, we're like kind of like a third-party organization talking to our clients' customers, and really that's the way that we do it. And it's been quite successful. And most of our clients, before they actually start with us, they're familiar with the fact that we're going to be doing these interviews, and they're a big part of our process.
I love that. I normally approach it from probably more of a technical perspective in terms of getting what I can get my hands on. So I'm a huge fan of custom extraction. And what I love to do is crawl an entire inventory if it was e-commerce or a competitor's site, extract their stock levels, their price, and any other kind of granular meta information that you can take away, breadcrumbs, how they categorize things, and then maybe attribute that with things like SEO data, impressions. Then you can start to bring in data from things like BuzzFeed to see where the engagement is and that sort of stuff. So it's not as focused and as detailed and as specific as real kind of speaking to people, but it gives you a real kind of top level perspective on what products sell, where the demand is, what their price point is, and then you may have 3, 4, 5 competitors and all that data to compare against. But yeah, I purely kind of don't tap into the customer side of things. I'm more front end website data. But yeah, that's. I'm taking notes on what Ayat just said because that was pretty cool. I like that.
Luke, you'll get a recording too. Don't worry, everybody gets a recording.
Fantastic.
So it doesn't seem like any others have come in, but I do know that if you're like me, your questions occur to you a half an hour after the opportunity arises. So if you didn't get a chance to ask your question or you're still formulating it, or if it occurs to you later, feel free to email it to me at colinl@unbounce.com. So COLINL@unbounce.com. And I'm happy to forward it with our panelists, or if it's specific to the benchmark report, to circulate it among our team and get you the answers that you're looking for. Also, if you stuck around this long, well, first of all, thank you so much. We have a little treat for you in the form of some Unbounce swag. So Morgan is going to drop a link into the chat. It's going to take you to a type form. You're going to provide your email, and I think that's it. And it'll send you to our web portal where you can order a piece of swag that will be sent to you for free to wherever you are in the world. So please get that swag. I think we're all missing the swag thing from in-person events. I know that I usually leave a lot of conferences with a big bag full of junk, but that I'm very excited about. Our swag, by the way, is very nice. It's very nice. This is a really nice hoodie here. I have to go with the pink. I enjoy it. So please do sign up for that. I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you both for your time today and for sharing your wisdom. And I think there's a lot of really great information here. I think this is one that's worthy of a rewatch for sure, to pick up a lot of those pieces of advice. Thanks to our crew, Charlene, Morgan, Garrett, and Floss, for handling all of the work that inevitably comes, and also running interference in terms of all of the distractions that come with a virtual event for me. I appreciate that. And thanks to our audience members for attending today. We make this stuff for you, so we were excited to see you come out. And stay tuned for more content from Unbounce in the future. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care,
everybody.